The Untold Psychology of Steve Jobs, How One Man Bent Reality and Built Billions. They called him arrogant, cold, even impossible. But behind the glare of the black turtleneck, beyond the sleek aluminum casing of a MacBook or the seductive swipe of an iPhone, there was something else. A mind that worked differently. A man who didn't just build products. He reshaped how humans interact with technology. This isn't another tribute video. This is a psychological dissection of a man who once said, "The people who are crazy enough to think they can change the world are the ones who do." And the truth is, he really did. But how? What allowed an adopted dropout with no formal business training to become the orchestrator of a trillion-dollar empire? In this audiobook-style journey, we'll peel back the layers of Steve Jobs, not just the legend, but the mind behind the movement. We'll explore 8 core psychological habits that made Steve Jobs not just rich, but iconic. Through intimate stories, hidden lessons, and brutally honest reflections, we'll uncover what truly set him apart and how you can use those very same mindsets to unlock something massive in your own life. So get ready. This isn't inspiration fluff. This is Steve Jobs Rewired. The reality distortion field, how Steve Jobs bent the world to his will. There's a term that floated around Apple in the early days, one whispered with both reverence and exasperation: the reality distortion field. It wasn't just a quirk, it was Steve Jobs' superpower. It all began back in the early 1980s at Apple's original headquarters. Steve would walk into a room filled with engineers who had spent weeks perfecting a single circuit. He'd listen, nod, then say, "This isn't good enough. I need it half the size, and done in 2 days." They'd protest, say it was impossible. And yet, 2 days later, it would be done. Jobs had a way of bending people's perception of what was possible. He projected such intensity, such unwavering belief in an alternate outcome, that others began to believe it too. One Apple engineer once said, he would stare at you without blinking and say, "You can do this. I know you can." And somehow, you would. But here's the deeper layer. Steve Jobs wasn't delusional. He was strategic. Psychologists today might call it cognitive reframing, changing the meaning of a situation to influence behavior. But Jobs turned it into an art form. He understood something most people miss. The human mind is not bound by truth. It's bound by belief. If you can control the belief, you can change the outcome. This mindset became the engine of Apple's most daring innovations: the Macintosh, the iPod, the iPhone. Every time people told him, "It can't be done." And every time he said, "Why not?" But it wasn't just about pushing others. It was how he pushed himself. Jobs believed the world was malleable, not fixed, not permanent, but something to be shaped like clay by those who refused to accept it as is. In one famous moment, he said, "When you grow up, you tend to get told the world is the way it is, but life can be much broader once you discover one simple fact. Everything around you that you call life was made up by people no smarter than you, and you can change it." This wasn't ego, it was psychological leverage. He rewrote the rules of reality, then expected everyone around him to play along. And here's the twist. It often worked, because people didn't rise to his expectations. They rose to the version of reality he made them believe in. So the question is, what version of reality are you accepting without question? What would happen if you simply refused to believe in limits? That's the first habit of Jobs. He didn't adapt to the world. He demanded the world adapt to him. Brutal simplicity. Why less made him more? Simplicity. It sounds gentle, minimal, almost soft. But to Steve Jobs, simplicity was war. In 1997, When he returned to Apple after being ousted over a decade earlier, he walked into a company that was dying. Bloated product lines, confused teams, no clear direction. He looked around the boardroom and asked a simple question. What do we actually do? No one had a good answer. Within weeks, Jobs cut the product line by 70%. Computers that had taken teams years to build, gone. Entire divisions erased. The goal? Focus on just 4 products: a consumer desktop, a pro desktop, a consumer laptop, a pro laptop. That's it. When asked why, Jobs responded, "Deciding what not to do is as important as deciding what to do." But this wasn't just about business efficiency. It was psychological. Jobs was obsessed with clarity. He believed that confusion was the enemy of greatness. When Apple was designing the original iPod, his only directive was, make it so simple, my mom can use it. That meant no manual, no instructions, no friction. When the first iPhone was created, there was one button, just one. Everything else happened through an intuitive interface. No stylus, no keyboard, no clutter. This obsession with minimalism wasn't random. Jobs had spent time in India, studied Zen Buddhism, and even lived in a commune. He meditated daily. His house had little to no furniture. His diet was raw and sparse. He believed simplicity wasn't the absence of effort. It was the result of intense, disciplined thought. He once said, "Simple can be harder than complex. You have to work hard to get your thinking clean to make it simple." And that's the paradox. Most people add more when they're stuck. Jobs removed, reduced, refined. He wasn't simplifying to make things easier. He was simplifying to make things better. Because in a world overloaded with noise and options, clarity becomes power. So here's the question for you. Where in your life are you overcomplicating things? Are you hiding behind complexity instead of chasing clarity? Steve Jobs built some of the most advanced technology the world had ever seen. But what made him wealthy wasn't how much he could create. It was how little he was willing to keep. That's the second mindset shift. Brutal simplicity. Ruthless clarity. Relentless focus. Everything else? Noise. The power of saying no. How Jobs protected his genius. Most people think success is about saying yes. Yes to opportunity. Yes to growth. Yes to everything. But Steve Jobs knew better. He once said, "I'm as proud of the things we haven't done as I am of the things we have done." Jobs understood something critical. Your focus only becomes sharp when you're willing to say no. Early in his career, Steve was known for his explosive creativity, wild ideas flying in all directions. But it wasn't until he learned to filter that creativity through focus that Apple truly began to thrive. Let's go back to the development of the first Macintosh. The team had hundreds of potential features on the table. Everyone was excited, until Steve walked in and erased the whiteboard. "No," he said. "This is what we're doing." Engineers argued, designers pushed back. But Jobs knew that greatness doesn't come from adding, it comes from subtracting. He once walked out of a product meeting because he felt the team had tried to do too much. He looked at the product manager and said, "You've got to decide what you're not going to do. Otherwise, you'll never finish anything." This wasn't stubbornness. It was strategic discipline. Jobs protected his time and attention like sacred resources. He turned down interviews, partnerships, even promising innovations, if they didn't align with his one clear vision. He believed in protecting his creative bandwidth, because genius isn't a limitless force. It's fragile. It needs boundaries. There's a famous story of Steve attending a brainstorming session after Apple had grown into a massive company. Executives threw out dozens of project ideas. After an hour of discussion, Steve walked up to the board, circled just one, and crossed out all the rest. "This is what we're doing," he said. "Everything else is a distraction." That moment became company legend. Here's what this means for you. Most people stay broke, not because they lack talent, but because they say yes to too much. Too many commitments, too many notifications, too many mediocre goals. Jobs got rich because he built an identity around exclusion, not expansion. And in a world that glorifies busyness, the power of saying no is one of the most rebellious, wealthy mindsets you can adopt. So ask yourself, what have you said yes to? That's actually draining you. What would happen if you started protecting your time like Steve protected his? That's the third trait of his psychology. He didn't just choose what to build. He mastered the art of what to ignore. Unshakable vision. Seeing the future before anyone else. Steve Jobs didn't just predict the future. He pulled it into the present. Long before the iPhone, before iTunes, before the iPad, he had already seen it. Not in code, not in circuitry, but in feeling. Jobs was obsessed with experience. Not just what a product did, but how it made you feel. That's what made him dangerous. He wasn't bound by the current market. He wasn't swayed by focus groups. He didn't even ask customers what they wanted or why, because he knew most people didn't know what they wanted until they saw it. Some people say, give the customers what they want, but that's not my approach. Our job is to figure out what they're going to want before they do. That was Steve's genius. Intuition over imitation. He could feel what the world would want before it wanted it, and he bet everything on that feeling. Let's go back to 2001. The world was still buying CDs. Napster had just been shut down. Digital music was a mess. Clunky MP3 players, terrible user interfaces. Then came the iPod. 1,000 songs in your pocket. Not specs, not features, just a vision. Jobs wasn't selling tech. He was selling liberation. A life without clutter, without confusion, just you and your music, anywhere, anytime. Fast forward to 2007. The world was used to clunky phones with physical keyboards. Then Jobs got on stage and revealed the iPhone. No keyboard, no stylus, just a screen and a dream. Today, Apple is going to reinvent the phone. People laughed. Critics doubted. Nokia scoffed. But Steve didn't need approval. He had vision. And vision, when held long enough, becomes reality. But here's the deeper truth. Jobs' vision wasn't just technological, it was emotional. He understood the future belongs to those who build what people will fall in love with. He didn't just imagine better devices. He imagined a better life, and then reverse engineered the tools to make that life real. That's what separates the rich from the revolutionary. Most people try to optimize what's already here. Visionaries like Jobs, they build what isn't here yet. So here's the reflection. What's the future only you can see? What are you waiting for permission to build that no one else believes in yet? Steve Jobs didn't wait. He saw it, believed it, built it. Then the world caught up. That's the fourth habit. Unshakable vision. Inner clarity, louder than outer doubt. How Jobs made people feel, wealthy through experience. Steve Jobs didn't just build devices, he built desire. When most tech companies were focused on specs, faster processors, more gigabytes, Jobs was obsessing over something radically different. How it made you feel. He understood something critical that most of his competitors missed. People don't fall in love with features. They fall in love with feelings. Let's go back to the launch of the original Mac in 1984. It wasn't just a computer, it smiled at you. Literally, there was a smiling face on the screen when it booted up. Jobs made sure the packaging felt premium. The startup chime was carefully tuned. Even the sound of the keyboard clicks had to be just right. Why? Because he believed that every detail was a message. Every touch point was a whisper. You matter. You're worth this. Fast forward to the Apple Store. At the time, the idea of a tech company launching its own retail store was considered laughable. But Jobs didn't want to sell gadgets. He wanted to create temples of experience. Clean lines, soft lighting, wooden tables, genius bars. Walking into an Apple store didn't feel like shopping. It felt like entering the future. This wasn't accidental. It was emotional engineering. Jobs knew that emotion builds loyalty faster than logic. That's why his devices weren't just tech tools. They were extensions of identity. Design is not just what it looks like and feels like. Design is how it works, he said. But more than that, it was how it made you feel about yourself. Holding an iPhone didn't just feel sleek. It felt elevated, like you were part of something smarter, cleaner, more intentional. Jobs tapped into a deep psychological truth. Wealth isn't just money. It's experience. And he built experiences that made people feel rich, even if all they had was an iPod and a pair of white earbuds. Those earbuds became a cultural symbol, a signal that you weren't just consuming tech. You were part of a movement. This wasn't marketing. It was storytelling through design. So ask yourself, are you just building things? Or are you building feelings? Do your ideas make people feel smarter, safer, more seen? Jobs understood that the wealthiest brands don't just solve problems. They give people an emotional upgrade. That's the fifth psychological trait. Design for the soul, not the specs. Create something people feel, and they'll follow you for life. Relentless standards. Why good enough was never good enough. Steve Jobs was famous for his relentless pursuit of perfection. But let's be clear, Jobs wasn't after perfect products. He was after perfect experiences, and he wasn't afraid to push anyone, to the breaking point to achieve it. You've probably heard the stories. Jobs throwing tantrums over minor design flaws, firing people over a single bad feature, demanding that his teams work around the clock until something felt just right. But here's the truth. Steve Jobs wasn't a perfectionist, at least not in the way we typically think. He wasn't obsessed with every detail. He was obsessed with the most important details. Take the iPhone launch in 2007. Apple's engineers worked tirelessly to design the perfect touchscreen, but Steve wasn't satisfied. Why? Because the feel of the screen when you touched it wasn't quite right. It didn't feel natural enough to Jobs. And so, they worked for months to refine it, until it was exactly as he wanted. Jobs didn't care about efficiency. He didn't care about the clock. What he cared about was whether or not the experience was flawless, and he had an unwavering ability to identify when something wasn't up to his standard. It wasn't just about making a functional product. It was about making a product that felt right, that felt effortless. That's where Jobs' genius truly lay. Here's an example. The original iPhone had just one button, a singular tactile experience. And that button, it had to feel perfect. If it didn't, it would ruin the flow of the experience. Jobs demanded that every aspect of the iPhone's design work in unison, with no friction. The display had to respond instantly. The click of the button had to be tactile and satisfying. Everything had to fit together. He would look at a product, touch it, and if it didn't feel right, he would demand changes. It was as if he had a direct line to the sensory experience of the user, guiding it with precision. For Steve, the question was never, is this good enough? It was, does this make people feel something? He wasn't trying to impress with technology. He was trying to create emotional resonance. That's why Apple customers didn't just buy an iPhone. They bought an experience. They bought a world. Jobs didn't accept good enough. He pushed until everything felt right, until it was perfect. So here's a crucial lesson for you. Are you settling for good enough in your own work? What could you do if you started demanding a level of excellence, one that resonates deeply with your audience? Steve Jobs created a standard for excellence that transcended the product. It became an experience people trusted, valued, and loved. That's the sixth trait: relentless standards, because good enough was never good enough for Jobs. The art of stealing: why innovation is really just a mashup of the best ideas. Steve Jobs wasn't afraid of stealing. In fact, he was proud of it. You've probably heard the saying, "Good artists copy, great artists steal." Jobs took this philosophy to heart, and it was one of the most controversial yet powerful aspects of his genius. Jobs didn't invent every technology that became iconic. He wasn't the first to create the personal computer. He didn't invent the mouse. He didn't even create the first smartphone. So how did he become the mastermind behind one of the most innovative companies in history? It's simple. He didn't just take things. He took the best things from everywhere and mashed them together in a way that no one else could see coming. Let's talk about the original Macintosh. When Jobs was working on it, he saw the Xerox Alto, a personal computer that featured a graphical user interface, GUI, a mouse, and Windows-based navigation. But the Alto wasn't popular. It was ahead of its time, and Xerox didn't know what they had. Jobs visited Xerox's Palo Alto Research Center, and he didn't just look at their tech. He studied it. He took the best ideas from the Alto and combined them with his own vision to create the Macintosh. But here's the catch. Jobs didn't copy the Alto outright. He added his touch. He made it elegant, simple, and user-friendly. He understood that true innovation comes not from creating something entirely new, but from seeing connections between existing ideas and bringing them into the mainstream. Then there's the iPhone. The smartphone wasn't new, but Jobs saw how different elements of personal tech could be combined into something revolutionary. A touch-screen interface already explored in other devices, the iPod experience perfected in the music industry, the phone itself, which already existed but hadn't been reinvented yet. Jobs didn't create any of these things, but he brought them together in a way that was so intuitive, so beautifully integrated, that it changed everything. Jobs knew this. Innovation doesn't always mean starting from scratch. Sometimes it's about taking what's best from different worlds and blending it into something better. And here's where it gets powerful for you. You don't need to invent a brand new product or idea to become successful. You don't need to reinvent the wheel. You just need to be open-minded enough to steal the best ideas, reimagine them, and present them in a way that no one's thought of before. Because innovation is about connections. It's about looking at the world around you and asking, what can I borrow from here, from there, and from everywhere, and make it my own? That's Jobs' secret to constant, world-changing innovation. He wasn't just a tech visionary. He was a master of synthesis. The relentless pursuit of greatness. Why Jobs never stopped. Steve Jobs didn't rest. He didn't stop. And when it came to greatness, he never settled. People often think that once a company becomes successful, once a product hits the market, it's time to relax, take a breather, and enjoy the rewards. But Jobs was different. Success didn't mean arrival. It meant the next challenge. In 2007, the iPhone was released. It was revolutionary. It changed the world. But Jobs didn't pause to celebrate. He immediately turned his focus to the next big thing. He didn't see the iPhone as the end. It was just the beginning. He said it himself. We're here to put a dent in the universe. Otherwise, why else even be here? And that was Steve Jobs' mindset in everything he did. He wasn't after short-term wins. He was chasing immortality through his work. He was building legacies, not just products. Even in his final years, as Apple became the most valuable company in the world, Jobs was still obsessed with making the next thing better. He was relentless. The iPad, released in 2010, was another revolution. It wasn't just a larger iPhone, it was a new category altogether. But Jobs didn't stop there. He always pushed his team to think bigger, to challenge the status quo, to imagine what hadn't been imagined. He wanted to create a product that would change the way we think about our human experience. Jobs didn't let his past achievements define him. Every win was a stepping stone to something more significant. He didn't settle for good enough, because he knew that once you settle, you start slipping backward. And here's the key for you. Greatness isn't just a one-time achievement. It's a lifelong journey of relentless pursuit. It's about waking up every day and asking, what can I improve today? How can I push the boundaries? Because true wealth, true success, it doesn't come from resting on your laurels. It comes from never stopping. Jobs lived with this idea ingrained in him. He chased greatness until his last breath. He didn't want to be remembered for his products. He wanted to be remembered for his impact. That's the final trait of the millionaire mindset. The relentless pursuit of greatness, never stopping, always striving, and always pushing forward. Final thoughts. The Steve Jobs mindset. What's stopping you? So, what can we take away from Steve Jobs' journey? He wasn't just a tech mogul or a visionary. He was a master of the mindset. A mindset that transformed his ideas into empires. Jobs taught us that wealth and success come not just from hard work, but from having a clear vision, saying no to distractions, building experiences that connect deeply with people, and relentlessly pursuing excellence. He didn't invent everything, but he knew how to make the best things better. And in doing so, he didn't just create a company, he changed the world. And here's the big question. What's stopping you from adopting this mindset? What's preventing you from chasing your own greatness? What would happen if you said no to the distractions in your life and focused all your energy on what truly matters? Steve Jobs didn't wait for the world to catch up with him. He made the world catch up to his vision. And the beautiful thing? You can do the same dash. Thank you for listening to this deep dive into the mindset of Steve Jobs. I hope you're walking away feeling inspired to take charge of your own vision, to protect your time, to push for excellence, and to never stop striving for greatness. If you enjoyed this video, please take a moment to like, comment, and subscribe. Your feedback means the world, and it helps this channel grow so we can continue bringing you stories and insights that can change your life. So, tell me, which of Steve Jobs' habits do you want to implement in your life right now? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. We love to hear your journey toward building your own success. Thank you for being part of this community. Remember, your greatest vision is just a decision away. Stay inspired, stay relentless, and as always, grow with purpose and rise with power.